Welcome everybody to the September Fire Safe meeting. We have a couple of presenters on our agenda. We're gonna switch the agenda around just a little bit, and I asked Chief Sampson to just give us an update on the California fires. We have a few very large fires that are fairly close to us. We have a couple of strike teams that are out of county from our San Mateo County strike teams. And so I know a lot of you are seeing the smoke that has been rolling into the Bay Area. So I just thought, since we're just hitting peak fire season, it would be great for Rich to give us an update.
Good morning. Rich Sampson, San Mateo Santa Cruz Unit, Resource Management Fire Prevention Program. Just a quick brief on the fires that are going around the state. Right now, the big fire is the mosquito fire up in Placer County. It's across the American River. It's at about 50,000 acres. Reports back and forth that it's entered Forest Hill. Everything I've got shows it's being held out of Forest Hill. They're being very active with aircraft on that fire. We have the Fairview fire down in Riverside. That's continuing, but along with the other Siskiyou fires up north, Mill, Mountain, and Coyote, they're getting a handle on those. What's interesting is if you look at this year, we're only at 345,000 acres burnt to date. This time last year, we were at 2.5 million. Tracking the number of incidents, we're just underneath last year's. It started to pick up again. And looking at the weather and the fuel, right now the weather, the big risk is abundant lightning strikes in the eastern and northern Sierras, and critically dry fuels throughout. Breezy winds west to southwest. So we've got a bunch of staffing patterns in place. This unit has a couple strike team. Well, we have an engine strike team out. Most of our crews are out. A lot of overhead out. They'll probably be out for at least another week or so. And OES has a lot of local government strike teams out all over the place. But we're not seeing, this is not up to the levels that we've seen in previous years. So I think a lot of that has to do with some very aggressive air resources that have been thrown at these fires. They've been keeping them small. And I think that's about it.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Rich? So Rich, any causes yet?
You know what I'm going to say, under investigation.
Okay, well, we had to ask. And do you have any numbers on how many people have been evacuated out of those fires?
Let's see. I know we have, right now we're at 757 structures destroyed, 94 damaged. Last year at this time, we were at 3,250, but I'm not seeing, I don't have any data right now on the number evacuated. There's still a lot of evacuations in place though.
All right.
Rich, it's Dawn. Do you know general location and when those Mill Fire and Coyote started in Siskiyou County?
I know the Mill Fire started, all I can say is pretty darn close to the mill, the Roseburg Mill. And as far as the other fires up north, I'm not familiar enough with them though.
So those are actually in Oregon then?
No, that's Roseburg Lumber. That's their
okay.
That's one of their California plants, or yeah, it was one of their California.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Rich. Well, we'll get started with our technical presentation, and we're lucky enough to have Edith Hannig from the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, and also Matt Damon from the Cal Fire's Land Use Planning Division. And what I asked them to kind of present to us was an overview, a summary of the state's minimum fire safe regulations. And this is code. And I wanted them to explain kind of the process of how it's adopted, where it applies, and a little bit of the meat and potatoes of what's in it. So with that said, Matt and Edith, the screens are yours.
Thanks, Denise.
Can you see that?
Yeah, it looks great, Matt.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll start it off. My name is Matt Damon. I'm the Deputy Chief with the CAL FIRE in the Office of the State Fire Marshal Land Use Planning Program. So I oversee that, and as well as our subdivision review program. And I'm our statewide liaison for the NFPA FireWise USA program. And prior to this, amongst other roles that I've had with the department, I was also the fire marshal in Butte County for about 10 years. So I've been on the local side of things as well as at the state level for quite a while.
And I'm Edith Hannigan. I'm the executive officer at the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. I've been the executive officer for about 9 months, but I served as the board's land use planning program manager for about 8 years before I took the executive officer role. So I've been working on the fire safe regulations for almost a decade. And so we're really happy to bring you this presentation.
All right. So our presentation today is a fairly short one, but we want to allow plenty of time for questions and for interactions when we're done. But overall, this is intended as we have some plans to create more trainings like this. This is very much just an introductory, and Edith will get into more of that in a second. But we do have some plans to have more trainings in the future that would be a little more specific and get into other things in this area.
Yeah, so today's goals is to cover the purpose and applicability of the regulations, giving a brief overview of the authority and the intent of the regulations, the goals of the regulations, and what activities the regulations apply.
There we go.
So the fire safe regulations are statewide standards authorized in statute by Public Resources Code 4290. The standards themselves are in Title 14. Some folks who have worked with the fire code and the building code and the fire safe regulations a long time call them the Title 14 codes, but they're in sections 1270 through 1276.04. They're applicable to the perimeters and access to all residential, commercial, and industrial building construction in the state responsibility area after January 1st, 1991, and within the local responsibility area very high fire hazard severity zones after July 1, 2021. So they've been in place in the state responsibility area for about 30 years, but they're relatively new to the local responsibility area very high. They became applicable there on July 1, 2021, and that's because of a change to Public Resources Code 4290 as a result of Senate Bill 901 back in 2018. These requirements set the minimum standards for development in the state responsibility area and the LRA very high. Most recently, we amended these regulations this year to add standards for fuel breaks, green belts, and the protection of, the preservation of undeveloped ridge lines. And those changes will likely become effective on January 1, 2023. Those are also as a result of the same changes to PRC 4290 that from SB 901. I can do the next slide.
Okay, just another point that we just want to kind of reinforce there is that these are the minimums, and that they are enforced regardless of whether a jurisdiction takes any action to adopt them, like Title 14 or excuse me, like Title 24 or something like that, they still are the minimum standard, regardless of that adoption status. Certainly jurisdictions can adopt more stringent standards, but these are the minimum statewide in the SRA and in the very high areas of the LRA.
Yeah, that's really important to keep in mind. There are some jurisdictions who in the past have not enforced the fire safe regulations because they think that if they don't adopt them, they don't have to enforce them, but that's not true. They are enforceable by function of being state law. Matt, was this your slide or my slide? I'm sorry, I've forgotten.
Kind of 50-50. I think the point that I make on this is just that overall, the risk of wildfire is higher in the SRA and in the very high areas, very high fire hazard severity zone areas of the LRA. And so therefore development should have enhanced requirements because of that increased hazard and the being able to mitigate those risks with those increased requirements.
Yeah, so what we're looking at, in general with these regulations is, can civilians get out and firefighters get in at the same time? And then the SB 901 added the goal of preserving undeveloped ridgelines to these requirements. I could do next slide.
Okay.
So in regulation, these regulations apply, these standards apply to all construction in the state responsibility area and the local responsibility area, very high fire hazard severity zones. And this includes individual building permits, as well as larger scale land development, such as parcel maps and tentative maps. There are some very limited exceptions to this requirement. In the SRA, construction is exempt from these regulations where when a building permit is pulled on a pre-1991 parcel map, where that parcel map has conditions for access and perimeter. So if that parcel map from, let's say, 1989 has requirements for road widths and driveway standards and things like that, then that parcel is exempt from the fire safe regulations. And then Matt, do you want to take the next slide?
Yeah. And so, with all that being said, we know that in practice, when a jurisdiction gets a project or a permit, that you should start from the assumption that the fire safe regulations apply. The fire safe regulations are a bit unique in that they live in both worlds, both the ministerial and in the discretionary worlds. And so that does kind of add to the complexity of enforcing the fire safe regulations. But generally, when you look at your enforcement of the regulations, look at is the impact of the project, what will that impact be, and what will that impact be on fire safety? And therefore, when you're looking at the applicability, how does the compliance with the fire safe regulations impact, or offset the impact on fire safety? And is that reasonable? So that's where that individual local interpretation comes in, and looking at the actual impacts and then how you're going to make those interpretations locally.
Yeah, so these regulations are written by the state, but they're enforced at the local level. So the interpretation and the application of these regulations is ultimately up to you and your AHJ's legal counsel. The board does not offer interpretations on the regulations. So we can provide information about their intent and their goals and what the standards are, but in terms of interpreting and applying them, that is up to the local enforcement agency. Oh, that was even shorter than I thought. So that was, so we are planning future training modules about how to implement stricter local requirements. If you do have a local requirement that is stricter than the state minimum standards, you are allowed to enforce that standard in lieu of the state minimum. We're looking at how to use same practical effects, sort of alternative means and methods for the fire safe regulations. And then of course, you know, a presentation on, you know, of course, we're taking suggestions, I guess I should say. We forgot to revise this slide from an earlier presentation that we did. We won't have a follow-up survey after this presentation, but please email us with questions or ideas for future training modules.
Okay, we're gonna have some questions. Casey, do you want to monitor this chat? So I have a couple of questions. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the subdivision? You know, what is required in terms of land use planning division, and when a local jurisdiction or county decides to approve a subdivision, what actually has to happen, and how does the state need to get involved?
Well, like I said earlier, the state does not get involved. The local enforcement is done either by the CAL FIRE unit, the county fire marshal, if contracted with CAL FIRE to perform that work, or in the local responsibility area, the local government. So the state doesn't review subdivisions. The state, you know, the state being the Board of Forestry, I should say. Obviously, if it's CAL FIRE, it's CAL FIRE, the state. But it goes through your regular local planning process. Matt probably has more experience on how the fire safe regulations integrate into, at least in his experience, the local planning process. But the state level, like the Sacramento level, does not get involved.
Yeah, and I think for clarification there is that there's, when you're looking at the applicability of the fire safe regulations in the very high LRA areas, CAL FIRE does not have any jurisdiction on enforcing that. It's something that is the local jurisdiction's responsibility to enforce these, you know, state regulations, essentially. Now, when we're talking about SRA areas, the local CAL FIRE unit, you know, generally, hopefully, it isn't happening that this is the first time that the unit and the county are interfacing, right? The county, both the county has a responsibility to give those projects or permits to the local CAL FIRE unit, and then the CAL FIRE unit has that responsibility to make comment on those. And so we obviously, when you have turnover both at the county level and at the CAL FIRE unit level, it kind of adds to the complexity of things, especially in areas that may not be especially busy with development. Sometimes those relationships fall away, and then we kind of work both at our Sacramento program level to support the units. But I think, and to kind of Edith's point, we don't do those reviews at the state level. The reviews, whether it's at the CAL FIRE unit level or locally, that really is kind of the beauty of the fire safe regulations. There is that local interpretation and the local enforcement, so to kind of give that local flavor, and so where it's not somebody that's hundreds of miles away making decisions on local development.
Okay, Patty has a question about the ridgeline protection element. She's wondering how it was added and what does it do?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that. So the ridgeline element was added as a result of the legislature changing Public Resources Code 4290, and which required the board to write regulations to preserve undeveloped ridgelines. And so the process that we came up with for that is that first, excuse me, a local jurisdiction determines which ridge lines in their area are strategic. And we provided some guidelines for examining how to determine which of those ridge lines were strategic. And then if those any of those ridge lines that do not have development on them already are no longer allowed to have, they are then protected as an undeveloped ridgeline. And new residential construction is prohibited on those ridge lines, but telecom facilities or storage facilities or utility buildings are allowed on those ridge lines.
Does that answer your question, Patty? MJ has a question about rebuilding after a fire. She wants to know if the code is required to be met. I'm assuming if it's prior to a 1991 project.
Well, from what I saw, MJ's question asks about can you build on the old building envelope even if it violates the 30-foot perimeter rule? So there is a requirement in the standards for a 30-foot setback from all property lines, but that requirement also has a alternative method of compliance pathway for times when it's impossible to achieve that 30-foot setback. So that situation is already built into the fire safe regulations. If you're building on a parcel that's, perhaps too small to have 30-foot setbacks or something like that, that is permissible through the fire safe regulations.
And I think it's important there to remember too, is just what Edith was saying, is that those are alternatives that are built into the regulation. It's not an exception. It's not something different. It's the option there for the enforcing jurisdiction to go with an one alternative or the other. It's not something that's making things more difficult. It's really one of those things that makes it more streamlined for both the project applicant as well as for the project reviewer.
So Edith, if somebody has a fire and their property was developed prior to 1991 and their house is destroyed in a fire, and so they want to rebuild, and they're in the SRA, and their destroyed house did not meet the current fire safe regulations, as they go to rebuild, do they have to rebuild per the fire safe regulations, or does that 1991 exemption apply?
Well, if the parcel is from 1991, and it has requirements for perimeters and access, then it is exempt from the fire safe regulations.
Edith, can I ask a question to clarify that though? If the property's lot specification doesn't have those perimeters defined, then they would apply? Because I represent the south part of the San Mateo County, and there's subdivisions that go back a century there. The plot lines and everything have very loose definitions to them.
Yeah, if there isn't a map, or if there aren't conditions, for road and access standards on that map, then the fire safe regulations apply, whether it's a fire rebuild or new construction.
Okay, so if I can carry on, if one of these units, one of these areas has like 80 households in them, 4 of them go down at the back end, which is a dead end box canyon. Does that, for those community members to rebuild, then the entire infrastructure leading to their houses also needs to be upgraded?
Well, yeah, the fire safe regulations are applicable to that construction. There is always the possibility to issue exceptions. There's a process for issuing exceptions to the fire safe regulations, but the fire safe regulations are applicable to construction.
And the exceptions would be the county's analysis.
Your local enforcement agency.
Right. I think out our way, it's all probably just the county. Okay, thanks.
Okay,
And,
Don has his hand up.
This question would be for Matt. Matt, can you explain in more detail the discretionary versus the ministerial when it comes to the interpretation and applying these standards for the local AHJ?
Sure. So ministerial is generally things like Title 24, dealing with like the building code or the fire code, that kind of thing, like your typical fire and life safety fire marshal type responsibilities. And then discretionary are projects that are generally handled by the planning department. And those are things to where it isn't necessarily based in a model code. It's to where there's things like the general plan take effect, or the planning commission will have a say, or an architectural review board. Those things where people's opinions come in more, and it generally involves more discretionary processes rather than being very prescriptive on a model code. That's kind of the difference. It's that planning versus building and fire type things.
Okay, and in interpreting and in applying the regs, I'm trying to.
So the way that applies to the fire safe regulations is that the fire safe regulations apply both discretionary to things like subdivision maps, tentative parcel maps, all of those things that the planning department would be handling, right? And then
Right.
the fire safe regulations also apply to building permits. And so it's the same set of regulations, but they live in the two worlds that sometimes don't necessarily have a lot of other overlap, right? I remember when I was the fire marshal in Butte County, I would talk to the planning department in like one meeting, but we didn't have a lot of interactions. I would deal with the building official daily, right?
Right. Thanks, Matt.
Sure.
Matt or Edith, do you want to just go over a few of maybe the, I guess the most basic, maybe like access to properties, what the actual code states, the turnarounds, some of the roadway widths.
Well, I see Bob Turcott has his hand up. I don't know if he has a question, but
Okay, we can go to Bob's question.
Thanks. It actually was touched a little bit on what Denise was just asking, and that is, I understand from what you said that the CAL FIRE's fire safe regulations began applying to very high fire hazard severity zones and local responsibility areas starting July 1st of last year, 2021. And there's this amended version that's working its way through the process. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on what the existing regulations are for local responsibility areas and what's likely to, how it's likely to change.
well, the second question is really easy. The only standards that have changed are those for fuel breaks, green belts, and ridge lines. So the standards for access, the road widths, signing and building numbering, water supply changes, those have not changed and will not change for the foreseeable future. So it's just fuel breaks, green belts, ridge lines that have changed. In terms of the in terms of the actual standards themselves, sure, we can go through some of them. I just changed my browser, so my bookmarks are all over the place. So I can pull up the existing regulations and we can go over some of them.
We do have a few more questions floating around if you want to do those beforehand.
Sure, yeah.
Is that okay, Denise?
Yeah, so there's a question about the fire hazard severity maps. I don't think this, I don't know if Edith and Matt can provide that answer, but any information would be.
I can give a very brief kind of update to what's going on with the maps. So it's really kind of a two-step process that gets kind of forgotten about sometimes. There's the state responsibility area process, the SRA. That comes prior to the LRA, the local responsibility area process. And so right now, the map data is being reviewed by the CAL FIRE unit that are responsible for the counties, the 56 of the 58 SRA containing counties. And so that is taking place right now. The actual adoption process is kind of, it's planned to be taking place later this fall or early in the winter. Basically waiting for all of the comments on the map data to be, again, reincorporated. And it's that scientific process that FRAP really does a fantastic job of working through and trying to balance, you know, all of the areas in the state, the nearly or more than 100 million acres statewide that FRAP is working on evaluating all of those using just a lot of different inputs and all of that scientific process to come up with really the best product that we can have. And so then once that is done, then that still has to go through the whole state process of adoption and the other various agencies and regulatory process. And then when that's done, the LRA process will begin, which should be at some point later next year. So that's kind of where we're at. The SRA maps will come first, and then with LRA to follow.
Chief Cox has a question. Is there a standard form we can use to review fire safe regulations at the unit level?
We don't have
not
them.
currently.
No.
Yeah. And so that, you know, we are working on things as far as for the CAL FIRE side of things. We are working on, we've got a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts to kind of better coordinate the state SRA process. But it's right now it's just a lot of kind of irons in the fire. And if Chief Cox has questions, he can always reach out as I direct all of our CAL FIRE units. I'm always available to support and to work through things. So give a shot.
So Edith, it might be good to just go through some of the definitions. I always found it a little bit frustrating about finding definitions between roadways and driveways. But you guys have a lot of great definitions in the regulations. So that's in the first part of Title 14.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can go through some of our proposed definitions. One thing we did clean up was the money. I'm sorry, I just got distracted by something. I should close my email. So yeah, I can give us some of the definitions. We have over 50 definitions, I think, or close to 50 definitions. So I don't know that we want to go through every single one of them, but we can definitely go through some of the more relevant ones that people have had questions about. One of the things that we did revise was the definition of a driveway versus a road. We changed that definition just to add greater clarity. We didn't really change it in terms of in general intent or outcomes, we don't think. So I'm putting the definition for the driveway in the chat. So a driveway is a vehicular pathway that serves no more than 4 residential units and any number of non-commercial or non-industrial utility or miscellaneous group U buildings. And a driveway is not allowed to serve commercial or industrial uses at any size. So a driveway, the driveway standards are applicable when a asphalt or when a vehicular pathway is serving 4 or fewer residential units, it can meet the driveway standards. Once it hits 5 residential units, or once it hits a commercial or an industrial use, then it has to meet the road standards.
Okay, that's a good one. So for the most part, commercial buildings do not have driveways. They only have roads.
Correct.
All right, with the other one, did you want to go over road surface, let's see here, road surface driveway. I'm just going through the definitions right now and seeing what would be good to clarify.
While you're doing that, we can jump in with Rusty's questions. I don't know if you can see that, Edith and Matt, I'll quote him. It says, I believe early drafts of amended regs called for significant changes to road standards and widths. Why were those changes, were those changes rejected, and why, if you're party to that?
Yeah, those changes were rejected. We, at the end of the day, we decided to narrow. So when PRC 4290 was revised, we thought we would use this as an opportunity to revamp the regulations, add some greater clarity, evaluate the road standards. And we had a firm do that, and they validated actually that the road standards were appropriate for what we were trying to accomplish, that the road standards generally were aligned with standard road construction requirements. So that they weren't, I'm really sorry, I'm getting an echo that's making me hard.
Yeah, I'm looking for the echo where there we go. Try it again.
Okay. Oh yeah. No, I still have it, I think. But anyway, so when they validated the standards that we had, we decided it was best to we tried a few different ideas, but we couldn't really get consensus among people about how to approach the fire safe regulations and what was the greatest amount of safety paired with the governor's housing priorities and things like that. So at the end of the day, what we decided to do was narrow the scope of the proposed changes to only address the things that PRC 4290 actually changed about the regulations. So that's where the fuel breaks, green belts and ridge lines come into play, because that's the only thing that PRC 4290 changed. So that's the only thing that we ended up changing in our proposed regulations or our proposed amendments.
Okay, in looking at definitions, green belts, that's pretty interesting. And what I think is the most interesting about the definition is that it can be designated by a local jurisdiction. So fire agency can designate a certain area, maybe a small kind of unformalized corner park as a green belt. Is that what this would allow?
Yeah, it allows a park to be designated by a local jurisdiction as a green belt.
Do they have to be designated, or if they're already considered an formal open space, or
Well, the application of the green belts is in conjunction with some type of building or development application. We're not expecting that local jurisdictions are going to go out and, apropos of no relevant development, designate a park as a green belt in order to be compliant with these regulations. These regulations, and that's a general statement as well, these regulations don't apply. If you have a road out there that's an existing non-conforming road, it doesn't need to be, the fire safe regulations do not apply to that road until or unless there is a development application for along that road. So the same thing applies to green belts, fuel breaks. If there is no relevant development happening near or around those features, those features don't need to be designated apropos of associated development. Wait.
yeah,
Yeah, hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, it could be a fairly complicated definition, because in the era where you have a lot of, I guess, open spaces, land that's dedicated to open space, but potentially the state wants more housing, you could have some of that open space potentially be opened up for development, you know, depending on if it was in the mission or the charter of the open space or the municipality to do so. So, but the open space, and some of these open spaces are really critical to fire operations because you can, you know, there's staging areas, there's, you know, areas for, you know, maybe a shelter, you know, in place area, if it's truly a protected green belt. So I would think these green belts could become in the future a little more important than maybe we're thinking of, or maybe I'm thinking way too far ahead of myself.
No, I mean, that's possible. You know, these are new changes. We'll see what the consequences of them are. You know, you might be right.
Don has his hand up.
Okay, Don, go ahead.
Again, probably another question for Matt. So Matt, as a fire marshal in Woodside, I am currently doing our own modeling and mapping for a hazard and risk assessment of our district. And when I'm done doing that, I'm wondering, what is the process, or do you have a template for the process for me to go to CAL FIRE to get them to adopt what our mapping professionals tell us is the existing risk in our district?
So I'm not, there certainly isn't like a formalized process. I would say, you know, there's a lot of, sometimes the terms get used interchangeably, and like the fire hazard severity zone maps are very specific to mapping hazard, right? And sometimes people conflate the terms hazard and risk, whereas, and so one way that we like to explain the difference there is hazard is like, so like if you're driving on the freeway, once you get on the freeway, the hazard of being on a freeway is always going to be there, right? But you can do things to reduce your risk if you drive the speed limit, if you avoid being in a pack of cars, if you're being defensive, you're going to lower your risk. But the hazard will still be there just because, you know, driving on a freeway is, you know, potentially hazardous. So that's kind of the difference. If you're talking about making changes to the map as part of that adoption process, if you wanted to change different ratings of areas once those are ultimately released to the LRA process, then there will be a formalized process as far as that. But the state currently, we're not building those risk maps. These are hazard maps.
Well, right, but what I'm saying is that I'm currently doing my own mapping, and I'm having these modelers identify and designate where the very high, and moderate is within our district. And then once they've designated that, I understand I need to go through CAL FIRE in order to get that formally adopted, correct?
Matt, I think I can actually answer this.
Sure.
Because CAL FIRE does its own mapping, right? We map the fire hazard severity zones. Local jurisdictions are required to adopt those maps, but they are allowed to make those maps more expansive. So if CAL FIRE mapped, you know, 20% of your community as very high fire hazard severity zone, and your modelers say, no, actually 50% of your community is a very high fire hazard severity zone, you're welcome to adopt that wider map. When you do adopt either the very high fire hazard severity zones or a map that's bigger than the very high fire hazard severity zones, you're required to send that information to the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. So, but CAL FIRE will not adopt your map. That's your adoption. You have gone above and beyond the CAL FIRE map. CAL FIRE is not going to adopt that map. They're going to keep their very high fire hazard severity zones. And that's relevant because there's a lot of other laws that apply. Anyway, I'm getting a little ahead of myself.
Well, so I think I need to send my information to the Board of Forestry then, is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah. When you adopt a map that is stricter, either the same or stricter as the very high fire hazard severity zones, it needs to go to the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. And that's for people listening who are maybe confused. That's a completely separate regulatory scheme from the fire safe regulations.
Right. Okay.
But it will be relevant very soon as CAL FIRE brings out these maps.
Right.
And as part of that LRA map adoption process, if there is opportunity for local jurisdictions to expand the CAL FIRE OSSM map, the official map in their area, but there is a very specific process that's in government code. It's like section 51175 through 51182.
Something like that.
That regulates and is very specific. In fact, there's legislation pending right now that's going to even clarify that even more. But yeah, when there's essentially, it involves just like making a case based on scientific factors that you're kind of referring to there, and then that the CAL FIRE map can be changed to reflect that. But that will be part of that process that, like I said, will be happening next year sometime.
Thank you, Matt and Edith.
Okay, Rusty has another question. Rusty, do you want to read your question? Matt and Edith, it's relevant to section 1276.01, the 30-foot setback.
Thank you, Denise. So under 1276.01 for the 30-foot setbacks, it's recognized that you can have, for practical reasons, alternatives to a 30-foot setback, and you provide some examples. My question is, by what standard should a local authority review and approve an alternative to a 30-foot setback for protection against structure-to-structure fire spread? What's the standard under the regs to assess whether an alternative is acceptable or not?
We leave that up to the professional expertise of the person evaluating the structure. Like you said, we provide some examples, so those are certainly appropriate. You can, you're welcome to pick from that suite of options. But there could be other ideas out there that we haven't been able to contemplate yet, or just didn't end up putting in the regulations, because that's also a relatively unchanged provision. That, if in your professional expertise, it is something that will prevent, structure to structure ignition, that is a appropriate alternative. So we specifically did not get overly prescriptive with that standard on purpose.
So I take it the goal of the regulation is to prevent structure to structure fire spread, and the alternative has to achieve the same effect as a 30-foot separation would, as the 30-foot setback would?
Right, yeah. So this requirement is to reduce structure to structure ignition. So any alternative method needs to reduce structure to structure ignition.
And Rusty, you might want to look at definition number 11, and Edith and Matt, please chime in on this. Substantial compliance.
That's you might be looking at an old draft. That's no longer a proposed definition.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought this was the current draft that I got from the state.
In the one with the markup that
Yeah.
you distributed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there might be something superseding this because there's some disconnect in the discussion.
Okay, all right. So there is no substantial compliance definition at all. So substantial compliance is up to the authority having jurisdiction.
I mean, substantial compliance isn't a term contemplated in the regulations at all. So that's not something that should be considered by local government.
Okay.
It's
All
just, enforcement and compliance with the regulations.
Okay, so it should be more like an alternative means then, not that, oh, it's 3/4 complete, so we should just let them do it. It's
Correct.
It's more of an alternate means.
Correct.
So it meets the same criteria. Okay, all right.
You bring up a good point there, Denise. There's a lot of conflicting, it's like, I thought I had the right regulations too, but apparently there's something out there that supersedes what we have. And where can we get the most recent copy of these regulations?
So the most important thing right now is to look at the existing code, because none of these changes that we've proposed are in effect yet, and they won't be for a few months. So I put a link to the existing regulations in the chat. So those are the current codes. So if a project came across your desk tomorrow, this is what you should be enforcing.
Okay.
In terms of a final draft of the proposed changes, and what we submitted to the Office of Administrative Law for their approval, and what we hope will eventually be effective on January 1, I can send out that draft to Denise after this meeting and she can circulate that.
Oh, that would be great. That would be great. So maybe we can just go over, we have a little bit of time. Maybe we can just go over some of
We
the
have
actual
Melinda
codes.
up. We have some more hands up and
Oh,
questions though,
okay.
if you want. Melinda Martin had a question up, and there was a question about development by Sheena.
Okay.
Question about development along ridgelines for
okay.
agriculture.
All right, we can do that. Melinda.
Thank you, Denise and Casey. So I wanted to add on to that discussion. So Dawn is a very similar situation that we have. We have adopted a local ordinance for our wildland areas. So I was wondering, Edith, where the correct location to send that documentation would be. Who do we send it to if we actually do have an ordinance in effect?
Yeah, you can send that to our land use planning inbox.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Let me get the email address for you though. So that can be sent to, actually I'll copy it and put it in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
landuseplanning@bof.ca.gov.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the other question in the chat was about Ridgeline Preservation. It's Nikki Hansen. Nikki, do you want me to read it for you, or do you want to go for it? Okay. So the question is, would these rules limit agricultural development, for example, a vineyard going in, or is it only for residential construction of homes, et cetera? And my hunch is it's a business, so it applies, but.
Well, it depends. This is very context dependent. It depends on whether the local jurisdiction has designated that ridgeline as strategic. And then if that ridgeline already does not have development on it. So one of the things that a local jurisdiction can contemplate is, the land use designated for that ridgeline. If that ridgeline, for example, is zoned agricultural, and it may be developed as a vineyard or something similar, they might not want to designate it as strategic, because eventually they know that there will be agricultural uses up there. And again, this is actually never mind. But so the potential for future development is something that could be contemplated by the local jurisdiction in determining that a ridgeline is strategic.
Yeah, I would think that if they really wanted a certain piece of land as a strategic, either fire break or, some sort of operational benefit, or kind of a shelter in place type area, that they could probably really be flexible and say, okay, this area, that 90% of it needs to be undeveloped, but if you want to develop some agricultural buildings down in this section, that's not a problem. And I think they could probably be fairly flexible with local planning and building department to do something like that. And I don't think in our county we're really there yet. I don't think these green belts are being adopted by local jurisdictions. I mean, we have so much open space and parks here that people sometimes complain that there's too much.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions in the chat, Casey, or hands up?
No, I don't see any right now, though I did have one about, if I could ask it.
Yeah,
Does-
shoot.
Do these requirements apply to private roadway systems?
Yes, they apply to all roads. We don't
Okay.
distinguish between public or private.
Okay. Because I'm looking at the dead end road stuff, and I know there's plenty of dead end roads out in the south part of the county with developments on them that housing on them that are much longer than what we see here in terms of the length in the Westlaw. Was it Westlaw? Yeah,
Mhm.
the Westlaw
Yeah,
document you
Westlaw.
provided.
Yeah. Yes, there are, of course, lots of roads that were constructed prior to 1991 that may not meet these standards, particularly the dead end road standard.
Right. So they're sort of grandfathered in, I suppose.
Well, again, these regulations are applicable when there's relevant development on those
Right.
roads. These regulations apply to the perimeters and access to this, to building construction. So these regulations are applicable to existing roads.
So it would be great to talk about some of the actual regulation sections, specifically road and driveway surfaces. I'm looking at 1273.02 roadway and driveway surfaces. So that's specific to support number of pounds that the roadway must support and what it must be paved with, or the code says road shall be non-erodible. If you wanted to just go over that, I mean, it's a pretty unique code section.
Denise, are you looking at the Westlaw link? Because that's not existing. That's not what I'm seeing in existing law.
Okay, so do you want to just, I don't have the new one up, so I have the old one up. Did you want to just talk about what is currently?
Sure. And I can, I'll actually just share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, the Westlaw stuff doesn't get into it at all, really, Matt. The weight issues. Yeah.
So this is the section on road surfaces. We are not proposing changes to the road standards. So roads must be designed and maintained to support 75,000 pounds and provide an aggregate base. Driveways and road and driveway structures, such as things like bridges, shall be designed and maintained to support at least 40,000 pounds. And the local authority having jurisdiction is allowed to request engineering specifications from the project proponent.
Great. Did you want to go on to bridges? Because we have some of our kind of wooey areas have a lot of bridges.
Sure. That would be under road and driveway structures. So there needs to have a signing, reflecting the capability of each bridge. The bridges need to be constructed and maintained in accordance with AASHTO HB 17 standards. Let's see. Where an elevated surface is designed for emergency vehicles, but there's surfaces that are not designed for that use, there needs to be barriers or signs or other information to let the drivers of those emergency vehicles know that they're, entering a spot that can't support their vehicle. And then when a bridge only has one traffic lane, it has to have unobstructed visibility from one end to the other and turnouts at both ends.
Another one that I think is important are road and driveway grades, Edith,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the WUI.
Yeah.
Usually
So
very
this
steep.
is a standard that's been in place since 1991. This is an OG fire safe standard. At no point shall the grade for all roads and driveways exceed 16%. We did amend this a few years ago to allow grades up to 20% if there are mitigations to that grade so that it performs at the level of a 16% grade. So that's like I said, that standard has been in place since 1991.
Yeah, I think a lot of local
this one-
agents. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to add in, this one is very interesting. We actually did on the ground testing with CAL FIRE apparatus years ago to confirm that a fire engine loses traction on an unimproved road at 16%. And it is, in talking to the original authors, it was just kind of a, like, well, that sounds about right. And we did actual testing that verified it like almost exactly. So there is some science that's built into this. It's not just somebody's thought.
Yeah, and I think a lot of local agencies have actually even become more restrictive on this section. And what about roadway widths and driveway widths? That's another popular one for new construction.
Yeah. So all of our roads are constructed to provide a minimum of 2 10-foot traffic lanes, and that excludes shoulders and stripings. So if functionally roads are more like 22 to 25 feet wide. We have one-way roads need to provide a minimum of 1 12-foot traffic lane, not including shoulders. So again, if you're a 12-foot lane, if you want to add shoulders, it's probably more like a 14 to 16-foot road. We have some standards for kind of what a one-way road can serve and those lengths for it. We do also require a turnout at the midpoint of each one-way road. And then driveways are constructed to provide a minimum of one 10-foot traffic lane, 14 feet of horizontal clearance, and unobstructed vertical clearance of 13 feet 6 inches.
And I thought I had read in one of these other drafts that if you had a gate, that you would have to increase it. Is that in the, that's not in the current code?
Well, again, we're not making change. So any of these sections here in Article 2, we are not making changes to those sections, but we do have existing requirements for gates. And that's that they be 2 feet wider than the traffic lane that it serves, provide for a minimum of 14 feet horizontal clearance and 13 feet 6 inches vertical clearance. The gate has to be 30 feet from the road. If when it's providing access, there needs to be a turning radius. If it's a one-way road with a single traffic lane, providing access to a gated entrance, and security gates need to be installed with the approval of the local jurisdiction and have to have an approved means of emergency operation.
Okay, are there any, hey Dawn, is there any other sections that you'd like to Edith just to put on the screen? Maybe the turnaround diagrams, the T-turns and the shoulder turnouts.
Sure.
Yeah, we can take a look at the turnarounds and see what they're suggesting for those.
They haven't made any changes to those,
No.
so
Okay.
we're really just letting everybody see what's existing.
Yeah, so these are the existing turnaround requirements. They're required on driveways and dead-end roads. The minimum turning radius is a 40-foot radius that excludes parking. If you use a hammerhead T instead of a circular turnaround, the top of the T needs to be a minimum of 60 feet in length. And then we have some requirements for where the turnarounds are placed, along the road or driveway. And then we have some diagrams.
Can we bring up the 30-foot setbacks so that we could take a look at what some of the existing alternatives are that are listed alternatives?
I just wanted to say one thing about the turnarounds. If you build it, they will park. And I know it's supposed to exclude parking. And that's an important thing, I think, for the plan reviewers and for planning and building to understand that you have to accommodate for the parking and then also for the turnaround for the fire apparatus.
Yeah.
And
Or
that-
put up
that's a
no
tough-
parking signs.
Yeah, paint the curbs all red, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
We have Joanne Kurtz with a question.
Well, I have a statement in regards to that. I totally agree because I back onto Stoolstaff Park and I can say almost every single day, somebody literally parks in front of the no parking sign in front of the fire gates every single day and go and walk their dogs in the park. So yeah, no parking signs at any of the, and painting the curbs red is super important for any of the places that are supposed to be designated for fire turnaround.
So these are the setback requirements. So all parcels shall provide a 30-foot setback when a 30-foot setback is not possible for practical reasons. And we give some examples, but again, I'm sure there are situations out there that we haven't thought of. And, you know, if you can make a good faith argument that a 30-foot setback isn't reasonable, you know, there's a heritage oak that would preclude a 30-foot setback, something like that. You know, that is an appropriate decision by the local jurisdiction to decide to allow for the same practical effect. And so we require that any same practical effect options reduce the likelihood of structure-to-structure ignition. And we give some options for same practical effect, but they're not, it's certainly not intended to be an exhaustive list.
Right.
We are making some changes to this in the proposed rulemaking, but it's for clarity primarily. The substance of the regulation is staying the same.
Can I get a quick question in while the screen's up, Denise?
Yeah, sure, Bob.
I'm struggling a little bit with the language. So second paragraph under B, same practical effect may include but not limited to 5 feet of non-combustible material horizontally around the structure, and then some other examples that are connected by the word or. So any one of those could be read as providing an equivalent effect. If 5 feet of non-combustible material horizontally around the structure is equivalent to 30-foot setbacks from the property line, all our problems are solved. So I'm wondering if I'm reading this wrong, because it seems to me that simply having 5 feet of non-combustible material around a structure does not provide equivalent protection against structure-to-structure ignition. If you had any, thoughts to help me, understand how to read that.
Sure. Like I said, we are proposing to make some revisions to this proposed change for clarity. So I'm gonna show a different screen. This is oh, that's not what I meant to do. Okay, this is our proposed. This is our proposed change and what it looks like. I'm not sure what you're looking at right now. Can someone confirm that you can see my Word document?
Yes, yeah, we can see it.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So these are our proposed changes. So we have here a reduction in the minimum setback shall be based upon practical reasons. We included some additional practical reasons, and then it shall provide for an alternative method to reduce structure-to-structure ignition by incorporating features such as, but not limited to, and we have the same thing, non-combustible block walls or fences, or non-combustible material 5 feet horizontally, hardscape landscaping, reduction of exposed windows, the most protective requirements in Chapter 7A. So these are same practical effect options when a 30-foot setback is not possible. This isn't, oh, I want to do this instead of a 30-foot setback. So your first application of these regulations should always be, okay, where's the 30-foot setback? And then if the 30-foot setback is not achievable, okay, is that for a practical reason? like I said, we give some examples of practical reasons, but there's others that I'm sure we never envisioned that could come up. And so then in order to, so you may have a less than 30-foot setback, but you've added additional protection measures in addition to whatever setback you can achieve. Maybe it's 20 feet, maybe it's 10 feet. You can achieve, you can still achieve additional fire safety and the reduction of structure to structure ignition with one or more of the following options, or other options like I mentioned earlier based on your professional expertise.
I guess the 5 feet of non-combustible material is not intended to imply that that by itself is sufficient, but that's just one of many things that you would do to achieve an equivalent degree of protection. Is that right?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Bob, you could probably say, so if you had an applicant and say they could achieve 25 feet, then you could say, okay, well, you got 25 feet. I want you to change the entire side, siding to non-combustible. I want you to change your roof type. I want you to have 5 feet. You could add things to give them the 5 feet. It's a give and take.
Right.
And it's really up to the HJ to figure out, and they have to do this in a very consistent basis. Because it's not really fair to have, a neighborhood and have everybody having, needing an exception and everybody having, different values available in the exception. It just wouldn't be fair.
Well, it
So-
also becomes a fire marshal's nightmare. When
Yes, it does, Dawn. Yes, it does.
Well, and that's something
um,
that we definitely lean into when we give advice to the CAL FIRE units from our program, is to, make a book, right, of to maintain that consistency of, this is how we interpret this. This is the alternatives that we utilize. And this is, to maintain that consistency, because that's really the name of the game, just like you were saying, Denise, is that you got to write it down somewhere to say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And then, it just makes it more straightforward going forward.
Yeah, can't agree more, Matt. Rusty, you have your hand up?
Yes, this seems to me to beg the question as to who makes this decision. We know that in the state responsibility areas, it'll be CAL FIRE. Who's going to make this decision in the local responsibility area?
Well, that depends on your permitting and planning processes. We didn't make that very specific here because there's lots of different ways that jurisdictions, first of all, divide themselves into departments. Sometimes you have a community development department. Sometimes it's development and public works. Sometimes it's planning. And there's all different groups of people who are involved in making these decisions. So, a great, so it really depends on your local jurisdiction and the way the way that these things get processed. So I can.
So I would just add, if I could add to that question, then it seems to me there's a little bit of disconnect here, that in the state responsibility areas, we're relying upon and calling upon CAL FIRE to provide its professional judgment as to whether the alternative is acceptable. When it comes to the local responsibility area, I take it the purpose of the regulation, at least, is to get a professional judgment, a firefighting perspective, as to whether the alternative that's proposed to address the lack of separation will achieve the same practical effect as the separation required by a 30-foot setback.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I think I might have missed part of your question. You
Well,
were
I'm
saying
trying to understand.
you go to CAL FIRE and the SRA.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, it seems to me that this is calling for the authority having jurisdiction here to have the professional competency that CAL FIRE has to make a judgment about whether the alternatives will achieve the same practical effect that the regulation requires.
That's correct.
And Rusty, I think probably 95% of the time you do have a fire agency reviewing, the construction, the application. even in the really remote areas, you would have the Cal Fire unit doing it, but especially in San Mateo County, I think all of our areas and a lot of these local jurisdictions do have little sections of SRA that they're responsible for doing the plan checks. And so there are fire professionals who are actually getting to see these applications, and they should be enforcing these regulations or adopting something that's more restrictive. I don't know, Matt, do you agree with that? Don, do you agree with that? I don't know any area that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think is what the board's intent, not to put words in Edith's mouth, was to not limit to say, oh, the fire department has to do this, or the building department or the planning department has to do that. It's just saying it's the local jurisdiction's responsibility in the LRA to do those things. And however that local jurisdiction decides to kind of divvy out responsibility is that local jurisdiction's pleasure, really. And it's not meant, I think that's kind of really indicative of all of the fire safe regulations, is that it's not trying to handcuff people. It's trying to give you local interpretation and what will work best, to achieve these goals, to achieve the intent of the regulations. But how that's achieved is left to the local jurisdiction in those areas. Even when it is SRA areas, it's left to the local CAL FIRE unit to use their knowledge, their skills, their expertise of their specific area of what will work best for them. They won't be enforced exactly the same everywhere. That's kind of the beauty and some of the issue with statewide regulations, right? Is that we have a really big state that's very diverse, and the regulations have to kind of set a minimum standard, and then how those are applied is left to each area, whether that's CAL FIRE unit or a local jurisdiction, to do that.
Yeah, that's
so-
exactly right, Matt. Thank you.
So we have a building official, Joanne Kirsch, with her hand up, so she can probably put some light on this subject.
Yeah, speaking as the retired building official for our jurisdiction in San Mateo County, it would definitely be whenever we've done, people are trying to do alternative means and methods because of this constraint on the property. When it involves fire code interpretation, we always involve the fire department. So it's the building official working with the fire marshal to come up with what's going to be the best achievable process for the property owner that's going to still meet that minimum standard. So you still, like I said, alternative means and methods, you still have to meet what's going to be an applicable standard. And again, keep in mind to write down those standards that you've used as your manual going forward for what you're going to allow in the jurisdiction. I don't know if that clarifies it for people.
Agree 100%, Joanne. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. We'll always have an opportunity to apply alternative means and methods because everything is funneled through our office before it's finalized.
All right, do we have more hands up, more questions? We're really digging into this. I appreciate Matt and Edith allowing us to dig in, but we have a pretty sophisticated group here, so I think it's important for everybody to hear and be able to ask you questions, and you're providing really great reasoning and answers, and we really appreciate having this time with you. I'll kind of do a last call for questions, or if there's any other part of the standard that you'd like to just kind of review. I think we've pulled out some of the important ones, the ones that will affect most residential projects, at least. All right, well, Edith and Matt, did you have anything in closing? Any recommendations for the fire agencies on the call, or?
Oh, we appreciate the work that you do to enforce these regulations, to make California more fire safe, to help protect your communities. You're important partners with us in this. So we do also appreciate hearing back, the board can't offer interpretations on the regulations, but we do appreciate hearing back about, areas where the regulations are unclear, or if you do notice an inconsistency, or if you're having trouble with a certain section, certainly let us know. We do use that information to inform future updates to the regulations. And so I know it's going to be a little rocky in the beginning, but, we, have full faith in your abilities to apply these appropriately and make sure that people are building safely in the wildland urban interface.
Hey, Denise, can I jump in with one question? Sorry.
Yes, sure, Casey.
Hey, Edith, you guys get, and this is going to be a little abstract, but for example, if Don from Woodside Fire sends to the Board of Forestry the local hazard and risk management information, you guys end up with like a superset of the information from Cal Fire and other people. What happens to that information?
Well, are you talking like if Woodside Fire sends us their map? Frankly,
their
the
map,
law,
their analysis, their models, all that stuff.
The law requires local jurisdictions to send that information to the board, but there is no directive for what the board is supposed to do with that information. So,
Really?
Yeah.
I knew there was something going on there.
Yeah. And also don't forget there is another requirement. There are some requirements for findings that a local jurisdiction, and this is usually the decision-making body, has to make on subdivision maps. I can put that section of code in here. So you have to make certain findings that the project complies with 4290 and 4291, and those need to get sent to the board as well. But again, that stuff is being sent to the board, but the board has not been directed to do anything with that information. So I'll send that to you as well.
It's like a Raiders of the Lost Ark thing, right?
Well, the state likes to collect a lot of data, Casey.
Well, the legislature likes to tell us to collect a lot of data, but then doesn't necessarily tell us what to do with that data.
Yeah. But it's nice to have it in case they need it.
All this work that I'm doing on these maps, I want to know that they're going to get adopted and I'll be allowed to be used in the manner that I think that they should be used, because I think that they're going to tell the true story.
As long as the map is more expansive than the CAL FIRE map, you're welcome to use that instead once you adopt it into your code.
Oh, thanks, Joanne.
There you go. Edith said so, Dawn.
There you go. I'll say Edith said so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Matt and Edith, really appreciate it. And Edith, anything you can send me, because I obviously had the wrong, I had an earlier draft, I guess, and love to be able to put out. And I guess as we get closer to, as the attorneys review everything, I guess they do have a tendency to change things, don't they?
Well, there's a limited amount of things that can be changed without going out for additional public noticing. So if the attorneys have significant changes to the regulations, that initiates a whole other process, and that January 1 deadline that January 1 effective date is no longer relevant.
Okay, well, I doubt that will happen. Nobody wants to do that.
I hope not.
They want those regulations out and effective as of January 1. So those will be available on the CAL FIRE site, and
well, we have right now. Yes. Once they're done, they'll be on the Board of Forestry website, and Westlaw will get updated.
Okay. All right. We'll be sure to post that on our website as well. And so I'll send out what you send me. I'll send out to all our fire safe members, and also send it out to the San Mateo County FPO, so they have it as they are developing their ordinances for their WUI areas.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you.
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for your great questions.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, that was great. I love all those technical presentations. I hope everybody appreciated their knowledge and having the people that are really driving this code on the call. All right, we already heard from Rich. I don't know if we have any announcements or other discussion for the good of the group. We have a couple more minutes. I know everybody's been busy doing defensible space. We actually have a few more chipping days in various parts of the county, so people are still doing their defensible space. We supposedly are getting a late grant from the state California Fire Safe Council. It's the evacuation grant that San Mateo County and Fire Safe applied for. We haven't heard when we're to receive it. They're very late in their announcement, but that's some good news. I'm not sure if anybody else has any updates on projects that are going on. I know El Granada and Corey Park are going to town with their work. Joe's
Denise,
on
it
the
looks
call.
like Rusty's hand is still up and Len's hand is up.
Oh, okay.
That was just my mistake. My hand's not up.
Okay.
This is Len Erickson. My hand was up intentionally. In the El Granada area in the mid-coast there, we are looking into fire-wise communities. At the last meeting, I asked for input. I've been in touch with David Wernberg for Hillsborough, and Casey talked a bit about his experience, but our Woodside and Portola Valley have fire-wise community areas, do they?
Yes, we do. We currently have 2 recognized communities that are Firewise, and I have an application in with the Firewise group that we just completed for a 3rd on Bear Gulch East community. And I'm currently working with Los Trancos Vista Verde, and I have Westridge and Alpine Hills in the queue. So if you need any information on how to set up for that, I have a ton of information I can pass on to you.
Okay, great. So you'd be the person to get in touch with.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could send me in the chat contact information, or I can follow up.
Yep, I'll do that.
Thank you.
All right, we have Joe, and we have a question Denise directed you about the evacuation grant project. So,
Sure. So Corey, we had 10 very different areas all throughout the county. We really tried to disperse it. I don't have all of them. Woodside did have one. I believe it was along Sand Hill Road. The eucalyptus there across from Jasper Ridge along Sand Hill on Portola Road. But they were very diverse projects all over the north, mid, and south part of the county. And who else has Joe? Joe has his hand up. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Denise. Hello, everybody. I've got a few updates. Feel free to cut me off if I'm going too long. I don't think I made the announcement at the last meeting. I can't believe we did, but we made an offer to a replacement for Sheena and Timothy Federal, who previously worked at the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, alongside Danny Franco, who some of you may remember from the Veg Map work, has accepted the position for managing the RCD's Forest Health and Fire Resiliency Program, and he will be starting on October 3rd. And so a couple weeks after he starts, he's going to be working on a number of things, including the La Honda Fuel Break project, working with the Midcoast community on wildfire resiliency, following up on actions recommended from the modeling work that we did there. And some of you may have also seen that there's an opportunity to get new LiDAR data for the Santa Cruz Mountains, which would help keep fresh and update the VegMap project that we did. We could do some change detection for before and after the CZU fire. So we're trying to cobble together about $60,000 to pay USGS to acquire Q1 LiDAR, so sort of the best you can get. And that's going to happen. If anyone has funding for that, please email me. My email is joe@sanmataorcd.org, or you can email Dylan Skybrook, the network manager for the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network, but we'll find a way. And then once we have that LiDAR data, we can sit on it and wait to find the funding to do the change detection, to update the veg map and keep that data fresh. So no rush there. The Huddard and Wunderlich Fuel Health, Forest Health Reduction Project is now completed. That was about 400 acres of forest health work. And David Cowman, our project or our forest ecologist, has been promoted to our forest ecologist from project manager, is working on developing a similar project in Butte State Park. I think somewhere around 700 acres would be shovel ready, and we would treat, I hope he's here to get my numbers right. I don't know, 400 or 500 acres over the next. Go ahead, David.
420 acres. So the whole project is.
That was close.
Yeah, the whole project is 2,100 acres of prescribed burning, mastication, and some hand treatments. And then we're hoping to treat 420 acres over the next 2 or 3 years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe we're still active in our fuels treatment at Quarry Park. We'll probably hit a lull over the winter and try and do work as we can during dry spells, but that will continue into next year. We're doing fuels treatment along roads, extending the work that was done during, remember the governor's projects, the like 35 priority projects. We're sort of expanding on that and also removing a large number of hazard trees that could come down on the road and block access. And then we've got some leftover money from the Huddard and Wunderlich project, and we've met with CAL FIRE, and we are going to investigate getting some other projects shovel ready, and that's stuff that David is spearheading. And we're looking at areas that would tie into the work that we did at the Girl Scout camp and sort of on the ridge between Buteno and Pescadero, and then around Pescadero County Park and the YMCA Jones Gulch property. Those are some of the areas that we're investigating, whether we can get more forest health projects shovel ready. And then we're also in conversations with Matt Diaz from Cal Forest to develop a vegetation, a Cal VTP, or get CEQA ready, some forest health work on industrial timberlands that would have been really challenging to find funding to get that work done. So a lot going on. We're short-staffed right now, down 2 people, so please bear with us until we get staffed up. And we've got an open job announcement to replace Amanda Brenna Cannon, who has moved on to the Santa Clara Valley Fire Safe Council. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Yeah, RCD has a lot of things going on, a lot of changes, and congratulations on your 2 new hires. That's great that you got Danny Franco. So he will be
Danny Franco's colleague. His name is Timothy. Oh yeah, Timothy Federal.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Our next meeting will be October 12th. And again, if you have any good updates or things like that, you can always throw them up on the IO group. And with that, everybody have a great September, October. See you next month. Thanks.